Salve a tutti lettori e lettrici di Wars Libri Comics, siamo nella cornice di Lucca oggi per un'intervista con Mr. Troy Denning, uno dei veri architetti del post-endor dell'Universo Espanso, autore di 12 libri, purtroppo nessuno tradotto in lingua italiana, che ci ha concesso la sua presenza oggi per l'intervista. Hello Mr. Denning, thank you for giving your time today. I will start with a question about your early days. When you discovered your passion for writing and also for role-playing game, and how did you manage to make your work? So, from a passion to make a job.
I discovered my passion for writing probably about in the 7th grade. A teacher gave us an assignment to keep a journal of what we were doing every day. And I started to keep the journal and I found that boring. So instead I just started to make up stories.
Your stories?
Just stories, yeah, fictional stories. And the teacher did not make me stop. So I kept writing, and that was the beginning of it all. My passion for role-playing came in my 3rd year of college when I came back to my dormitory one night and happened to walk by a friend's room where he was playing this weird game with another friend. They were just talking back and forth and rolling funny looking dice. So I stopped to see what they were doing. And of course they were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And
the beginning of the end.
Yes. And then I stayed and watched and rolled up a character and tried to kill my first dragon that night. It didn't go well.
And it didn't go well.
Yeah.
For everyone, the same the first time.
Yeah.
I suppose. And let's now move on Star Wars. Do you remember your first contact with the saga? And working on it for many years, how has changed your approach to it? Because you started as a fan, I suppose, and then you were on the other side working on it, so your perspective may have changed.
I started, my first exposure to it was in the year it released, when a friend, I was a senior in high school, and a friend of mine came back. He was ahead of me by a year, so he came back from college and talked me into going to Denver, which was about 45 miles away from where we lived in the mountains, to see this movie. And we drove down to Denver to see this movie, and there was this line that stretched around the block, and I said, oh, I don't know, I think we should see another movie. And he said, no, this is supposed to be really good. So we got in line and stayed in line for, I think it took 3 hours to get to the box office, where we discovered the only tickets available were for the midnight showing. So we bought them, and then we went and found a phone booth, and I called my dad, who was our county's undersheriff, one of the higher law enforcement officers in America, and I told him I wasn't going to be home until sometime in the early morning, and he thought that I was just going to go out and party all night. And he said, no, you're coming home now. And I said, no, Dad, we already bought the tickets. And he didn't believe me. He had reason to think that I might
That's a
be
father
out
job.
partying. Yeah. So he didn't believe me and said no, and I said yes. And he said, well, you've got to come home, or and I said, Dad, I'm 19. I'm legal age. I'm going to stay up all night and see this movie. And he's like, all right, I'm going to have the sheriff's waiting for you at the county line. And I said, fine, because he thought I would be in no condition to drive, because he thought I was going to a party and not a movie. Yeah. So we went and saw the movie, and we were just thrilled. I mean, we were both blown away. And the next showing happened not to be sold out. So we bought tickets again and stayed for the second showing, which meant we were leaving the movie at about 5 in the morning. And we drove home, and sure enough, there was a sheriff waiting for us at the county line. He stopped us, gave me a breathalyzer test, did the whole thing just to make sure I wasn't driving impaired. I wasn't, and he called up my dad and seemed rather confused about what to do. So I got home, and Dad was like totally in disbelief. you know, that's what I had really done. And I said, look, Dad, it was a life-changing movie. You just wait and see. And it was my pleasure, like 20 years later, to give him my first signed book of Star Wars, where I wrote in it, Dad, I told you so.
Has your dad seen the movie after all that?
I don't think he ever did see the movie. Yeah, but he was finally impressed enough that he really understood that, yeah, it was worth.
Your enthusiasm was enough for him.
Yeah.
Your debut in the Star Wars saga is dated 2001 with the short story Recovery and the novel Star by Star, the 9th installment of the New Jedi Order. What do you recall about these days, and when did you came in contact with Sue Rostoni and Shelley Shapiro, that were the masterminds behind the project at the time?
Okay. Before being offered a chance to write in Star Wars, I had written about 15 Forgotten Realms novels. And during that time, one of my friends became R.A. Salvatore, who coincidentally was offered the first book in the New Jedi Order.
My favorite book.
Yeah, Vector Prime. But before I knew about Vector Prime, he called me up and asked me, I'm remembering right that you're a fan of Star Wars. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, oh, that's great. I just wanted to let somebody know that you were interested. And I said, okay, great. Then a short time after that, Shelley Shapiro sent me an email asking if I was interested in writing a Star Wars novel. And I said, oh yeah, of course I am. And she said, well, send me some samples.
Thanks.
Yeah. She said, send me some samples of your writing, and we'll take a look and see if you're right for this project. So I did. I sent her like 3 books, 3 of my best books. And then I didn't hear anything for a month, which didn't alarm me too much. So I called her up and just said, just checking in, did you get the books and did you like them? She said, oh yeah, we loved them, but we're not ready yet. And so I did that a month later, and same answer, and then a month later, the same answer. And finally I said, well, this just isn't going to happen. I must not be right for the project. And so I stopped doing checking in with her. Then about 3 months after that, I get a call from her out of the blue, and she says, okay, we're ready to make an offer. And I said, okay, I'll write up a proposal and send it in. And she said, oh no, we know what we wanted you to write. And I said, oh great, what do you want me to write? And she said, well, I can't tell you until you sign an NDA. And I said, okay, send me the NDA and I'll sign it. And she said, well, there's just one problem. We're in kind of a hurry, so we want to send the contract along with the NDA. And I'm like, wait a minute, you want to contract me for a book that I don't know what it is and that you can't tell me anything about, and you want me just to sign blind? And she said, yeah, that's about right.
That's how it works.
Yeah. And I said, well, it's Star Wars, so okay. And then she sent me the Bible and the contract for the New Jedi Order. And remember, at this point, even Vector Prime wasn't in public yet. So I started reading through all of the Bible and finding out what it was that they wanted me to do. And I came to some of the parts. Here's the spoiler alert for Star by Star. I come to the part where Anakin dies, and I'm like...
And that will be the next question.
Yeah, and I was like, oh no, now I see why she made me sign the contract before she sent me the Bible. And it was pretty wild.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was my introduction to
the saga.
To the New Jedi Order and to Shelley Shapiro, and I met Sue Rostoni a few months later when we went out to Lucasfilm to plot in more detail the rest of the New Jedi Order.
And the question is specific about Star by Star. You partially answered yet to this. It was the turning point of the saga, and it needed to show how, after Vector Prime with the death of Chewbacca, needed to show how the heroes, the good guys, were still in danger.
Yeah.
So we are going to the Anakin sacrifice.
Yeah.
The question would have been if it was your idea, or it was decided on a round table, but you said me now that they submitted to you the idea. So you had to build the novel around this pivotal moment.
That's correct. That's correct. When I was reading the Bible, I'll go back and give a couple of reactions to that, because the first thing I read in the Bible was where Chewbacca dies. And I called, and of course that Bob is the one who wrote that. So I called up Bob and said, "Oh my God, you killed Chewbacca," right? And he said, "Yeah," laughed, and he said, "Wait until you see what you do." And of course that's when I went and saw that it was Anakin who died. It was pretty jaw-dropping. I remember thinking, I don't know, this book is either going to make my reputation or it's going to sink it, because you can't be anywhere in between on this kind of story.
I've read all the New Jedi Order, and Star by Star is easily in a top 5 to me. It's possible to have a copy of this Bible, this guide, or all copies have been destroyed?
I doubt that they've all been destroyed, but...
You don't have the permission, of course.
I don't have the permission to share it, and I'm not sure that I still actually have a physical copy at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are the architect of the Deep Postendor. You worked with Karen Travis and Aaron Alston to the big series Fate of the Jedi and Legacy of the Force, and you write the bridge series between the New Jedi Order and Legacy of the Force, the Darkness trilogy. How is difficult for an author not to end one of the series, but both of them, without counting the Darkness? Because I think you need to tie all the loose ends, make up the expectations of the fan and the will of every author to make a good book. Is it simple, or it was a bit difficult? Because the ending of the Fate of the Jedi, the ending of the Legacy of the Force, they were big series. So how was to end all these mega projects?
Well, of course you feel a tremendous sense of responsibility, because you're writing a Star Wars book, for one, and then you're writing the end of a long series, major series, and that you feel the weight of that responsibility when you're writing it. But you try to just do the best job you can. You're fortunate in that you've had many discussions with the editors and your fellow authors about leading up to that, so you have a very strong idea of plot points that you need to cover, things you need to do to tie all the story together. And it's not anything that you're doing by the seat of your pants. It's all part of a major plan, so you know what you have to do. You just have to be sure that you do it in a suitably grand fashion to honor the series and the characters.
It's not an easy thing, because I not remember because I read the book after many years, Vector Prime, the bad reception that received, sadly, Salvatore for the Chewbacca death. So it's all a game of balance, I think.
Yeah.
Now, a little curiosity of mine. Has ever been on the table a book set between the New Jedi Order and the start of Legacy of the Force that would have been explored the journey of Jason through the galaxy, studying the various Force cults? Has ever been on the table the outline, the idea?
We have, of course, discussed just that, because it would have been a very interesting book. But the publishing schedule being what it was, they didn't see how they could take a break of a year or so in the publishing schedule to slot that book in. So it would have to be kind of a book that arrives after the fact, kind of like a prequel to the series. And I think they felt that there just wouldn't have been that much enough interest to support it, to talk about what his journey was that led him to this transition.
Okay.
That it's an iffy question. It's a judgment call.
Okay.
Whether there would have been enough call for it. I think ultimately why it probably didn't happen was that the people who would have written it were committed to, it would have been either me or Matt Stover, and we both had other projects going that prevented us from doing it in the time slot
also that
where
books,
we would have
yes.
done it. Yeah.
And talking again about how to conclude a story, you also wrote Crucible, that is the last book in the Legends timeline. How did you prepare to write the last story of the classic heroes of the original trilogy?
Well, our original intention wasn't that it was going to be the last story of the Legends era. Our original intention was that it was going to be a bridge book in which the old heroes, Han and Leia and Luke, pass the torch of leadership to the next generation of heroes, mainly Jaina and Ben. So we planned for that. We discussed the book, as we always do, in great detail and everything that we had to accomplish. I wrote outlines, they made comments on the outlines, and you know, until we were all happy with the story. And then I began writing it, and I was about halfway through writing it when I got the news that Disney had just bought Lucasfilm. And I said, oh, wow. And at that point, I said, well, okay, what does that mean for this book? And they said, we don't know. Why don't you pause writing until we find out? And I said, okay.
That's not a great thing for a writer, I suppose.
Right, it wasn't. It was terrible. But so I paused the writing. I called them up in a month and asked, okay, are we still going to have EU to continue writing? Does this book still make sense? And they said, well, we don't know yet. And so I said, okay. I waited another month, and then I called them back up, and the same answer, we don't know yet, because it's taken a lot of time to figure out things at the Disney end and at the, you know, the coordination between Disney and Lucasfilm. So I kept getting that answer, and finally they just said, well, why don't you finish the book so that it could go either way? And that is like the worst possible answer they could have given me. It's like, okay, you really don't know how we should end this book. And they said, yeah, that's about right. So I just wrote it to the end where it could be kind of ambivalent. I wasn't actually pointing the torch toward Jaina and Ben, but I wasn't like not pointing the torch. So it became a little bit of a struggle to finish it, but I still was tremendously proud to, you know, have written that book, because it was Han Solo's kind of swan song in the Legends era. I guess that's all I can really say.
That's how the things go.
Yeah, that's how things went. Yeah.
And leaving Star Wars behind us for a moment, you are in the game since the 80s. Television, internet, TV series, and now artificial intelligence. How has the entertainment changed in these decades? And most importantly, how this new media, this new entertaining, can affect comics, books, and tabletop games, especially the ones set with a set sci-fi or Western fantasy, because I think that are two genres that haven't too much grip on the new generation.
Yeah, I've been in this business long enough to know that the one constant is change. When I started writing Star Wars, my first venture in writing Star Wars was actually for the West End Star Wars role-playing game, and I started there. And at that time, it was a relatively new concept that we could actually have video, VCR tapes of movies. So the VCR tapes of the Last Hope and the first Star Wars trilogy weren't officially available as commercial products. So to do my research, West End sent me some VCRs where they had gone into a showing of the Last Hope and a couple of the other movies and secretly videotaped them, and then converted them to the VCR, and then sent me a copy of that VCR. And that had been copied time and time again. By the time I got my copy, it was probably 10th generation, and it was barely recognizable, right? So that was what the technology level was like when I started. Then, of course, all this stuff became commercially available on VCRs, and then we moved it to DVDs, and now it's streaming, and the technology just keeps changing and changing. And it makes it immensely more convenient for me as a writer, because when I started in the business, I had to literally sit down and watch these movies time and time and time again, and make notes about what each of one of my first assignments, for instance, was writing a galaxy guide about the creatures that were in that first cantina scene, where Hans shoots Greedo. Right. So I had to sit down and make notes about these characters, try to figure out if they had names, try to figure out if they had a race that was actually being addressed, and then if they didn't, I had to make all that stuff up. Okay, and then I could just write my own descriptions. So at the very beginning, it was like I'm just filling in the blanks for all kinds of information that doesn't exist. By the end of my writing career with Star Wars, we had Wikipedia, we had a similar digital resource that Lucasfilm was keeping. We had big encyclopedias of the whole Star Wars universe. We had the, what did they call them, the guide to characters, the essential guides, the essential guides of the characters, the weapons, the ships, everything. So all of that research was compiled and available to you. Made your job as a writer much easier, because it was so much easier to do the research. You could just go look it up. You didn't have to go back to first sources.
Okay. Yes. And you are well known also for your work with the role-playing games. You created the setting of the Dark Sun for D&D and wrote many novels, a dozen novels, if I recall correctly, in the Dark Sun campaign and the Forgotten Realms. You also worked on Halo novels and Kim Possible.
Yeah.
Yes. It's different. They are all important IPs with different audience targets, of course. How is different working with each of them?
It's very interesting, but first I'm going to note that I didn't actually write any Kim Possible novels. I'm credited.
It's a lie. The internet lies?
The internet lies.
No.
The internet is mistaken. I've seen that many places. If you go on Amazon, you can look it up, and I am credited with writing these novels, but I didn't, and I have not been able to get that corrected anywhere. What I think happened is a co-writer that I wrote one of my first books with, the Avatar trilogy. Scott Cienson and I wrote the Avatar trilogy under the name Richard Awlinson, and then Scott Cienson wrote the Kim Possible novels, and somebody mistakenly thought that Scott Cienson was another of my pseudonyms, and just converted me and credited me with writing the novels that he had actually written.
The lesson is, viewers, don't believe everything you read on the internet.
That's great. That's true. So now I have to go back to the original question, if you can remind me.
The original question was, how is different working with each one of these IP? Maybe some are more restrictive, more are easygoing.
It's very true. That's exactly the truth of it, is that some of them are give you a freer hand than others. Of course, when I wrote for TSR, I had been a designer. I was well acquainted with all of the people who I was working with. I'd been on staff. I was one of the original co-creators of Dark Sun.
They were also different times.
Yeah, they were also different times. So I had to follow what was written. For instance, when I wrote in Forgotten Realms, I had to stay within the boundaries that were set by Forgotten Realms, but I had a lot of freedom because I had a lot of trust. People trusted that I wouldn't go too wild, and so they just would basically kind of look over my shoulder and say, well, don't go there, you're going too far. But I had a lot of freehand. With Dark Sun, of course, and the Prism Pintad, I had a total freehand because I was the guy.
It was your sandbox.
Yeah. Then when I moved on to writing Star Wars, it was far more restrictive, they had a lot more solid boundaries. You have to stay within these lines, and there's no getting over them. And that was just because of the nature of the movie universe and the licensing universe. They had to keep a very tight control of it, and the time, because remember, this is kind of still early in the shared world expansion, the explosion of shared world writing. So it's an unfamiliar thing for most people at that time, how to run a shared world or a tie-in world. So it was very. They did their best to give you as much freedom as they could, or thought they could, but they would tell you, no, you can't do that. You can't. That's going too far. And sometimes I would forget and try to do it like 3 or 4 books in a row, and they would tell me, no, you still can't have a Gamorrean Jedi. We told you that 3 books ago.
Sadly.
Yeah. So it was much stricter, but it's still very friendly.
Aaron Alston made a Gamorrean pilot for the X-Wing series.
Yeah. But so it was, very. The rules were very, very hard and fast and defined, but they did their best to help you color within the lines. And then when I moved on to Halo, they of course still have the similar outer boundaries where you have to stay within certain parameters. But when you would brush up against something and not really understand that you were, their answer would always be, well, you can't do it that way, but you could do it this way. So working with Halo has been pretty free and liberating, and they're very supportive of what you're trying to do. They give you, they support your vision as an artist, and they try to make it work within their parameters.
Their universe.
Yeah. Okay. Which is a little bit freer than the Star Wars universe is. The Star Wars people tend to view it as you are working on our vision.
In Star Wars, you are adapting to Star Wars. In the Halo, they adapted Halo to your writing style, for your ideas.
It wasn't so much that they adapted Halo to my ideas, it's that they showed me how to adapt my ideas so that they worked for Halo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, one last question, a tricky one.
Okay.
Everyone, given the chance, would change something in the past, a choice made or something like that. Would you change something of your works? Not only Star Wars, given the chance.
Change, I guess I'm looking for the magnitude of the change that you're asking. Yeah.
It's up to you how to answer.
Honestly, I probably wouldn't. Not because there aren't things I wish I had done better, but because I like how things have turned out. I like where I am in life right now, and I like where my career has turned out, and I love the books that I put out and the fan following that I've managed to develop. And I wouldn't want to change that, and I would worry about changing any little thing and have the butterfly effect come along, and all of a sudden I'm not where I want to be.
In retrospect, it's easy to say I would have changed that.
Yeah.
But what I liked in your answer is that in the awareness that I made that way, that time, and it was the right choice then. So I think that's an answer that I like.
Yeah, it was the right choice for the time, but also in the long run it proved to be at least not a bad choice, because I'm very happy
how all the things
with where I am now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you again for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Mine.
Yeah.
Questa è l'intervista che ricordiamo girata a Lucca 2024 e che la forza sia con voi. Grazie a tutti.